When you go meet a potential client for the first time, you don't start with your logo or hand them a price sheet. You read the room, you ask questions, you figure out what they already know, what their issues are. You break down complicated jargon into analogies or easy to understand words. You find out that they have a dog just like yours, and you bond over the shedding. People like that. It makes you a good communicator and a person. But look at your marketing. It's pricing tables, it's feature lists, it's a logo redesign that you spend 3 months on. It's all tactical. It's important stuff, but none of it does what you just did in that conversation. None of it makes someone lean in. We spend so much time on the tools, the ads, the funnels, the SEO, the brand colors, and not enough time on what's underneath all of that. Just how TV shows have sets and actors and props, none of that makes a show worth watching unless they get you to connect with the character or have a great plot that keeps you on your toes. Good marketing, like a good show, makes you care through storytelling, the oldest skill humans have, and the one most businesses forget they already know how to use. My name is June, and this is Antiviral, a human approach to marketing. All right, so I wanted to create an episode after we have gone through strategy a little bit deeper because I think it's a really important part of strategy. The idea of telling stories, the idea of storytelling, because it's about what you say. And that's often one of the hardest hurdles that a lot of businesses come to me with and have issues in general is I know how to use social media. I can create a website or I can start advertising, but I don't know what it is that I should be putting in these channels to actually make someone care enough to listen, right? We all talk about how nowadays people have like the attention span of a goldfish, 3 seconds or less, that sort of thing. But I think a lot of people mistake what that means, what that truly is. And I think for a lot of people, is yes, we have a 3-second attention span, but for the things that we don't care about. For the things that we care about, I can read an entire book if it's good enough. I can listen to a podcast for 3 hours if it's stuff that I'm interested in. I watch movies that are 2 hours long because I care about it. So it's not a problem of attention span necessarily. It's a problem of, do I care about what you're trying to tell me? Do I care enough to pay attention, to listen, to stay? And that's why I thought this would be a good episode to just talk about storytelling a little bit more. Because us as humans, we've been telling stories since before the invention of the alphabet. Like just look at the history of humanity. It's just one gigantic story. There's like paintings in caves from years ago. I can't even tell you. I don't know if it's hundreds, thousands. I'm going to assume it's thousands, but like so long. There's then we started chiseling on rocks to try and create alphabets, to try and create, you know, something to communicate. Then we started writing on parchment paper and then books and then, all these kinds of things. I even know that a lot of indigenous cultures pass off their teachings through stories, right? By verbal communication. It's in our DNA as people to tell stories. And think about the way that you naturally handle conversations. When you have something interesting to tell, I guarantee you, because I do this as well, but you usually go like, you're not going to believe what just happened, right? Or like, I really have something to tell you right now. And look at what just happened there. You started with attention. You opened a loop, if you will, right? you're not going to believe what just happened. That makes people lean in. That makes people be like, oh, what happened? Right. And then you start giving the story. You don't just immediately go, hey, look, you know, this happened, but let me start from the beginning. Sometimes you do that, but chances are a lot of the time when you are telling a story, you naturally progress from the beginning, the middle, and the end. You start at the beginning, you give that tension, you give that context, and then you tell the punchline. And this happened, right? And everybody's like, oh my God, or whatever. And then you have a resolution, right? Then you talk about how you felt, or you talk about how you viewed it, or maybe the reason, the reasoning about what you're going to do next based on whatever happened. These types of stories that just come out of us is natural because it's how we explain the world. Sometimes telling you a really carefully crafted sentence, right? Like, I went to the beach, as an example, doesn't capture just how enjoyable it was for you, as an example, or how much you cared, or what happened in that space that made you want to tell a story. And that's what stories are for. It's essentially to retell something in a way that the other person has a deeper understanding, in a way that you wouldn't have if you hadn't known the entire thing, if you hadn't known from the beginning and gone through the end, right? There's a different level of understanding that someone has when you tell them a story and they're like, oh, that's so cool, or that is amazing, as opposed to be like, oh, this just happened to me, right? It's not the same thing. And the funny part about our level of storytelling is that none of it is planned. We don't, you know, I don't think we get taught in school how to tell stories. It just naturally comes out of us. We listen to how other people talk, right? As we are, when we're little, and then we just kind of pick it up and then just do that from there and create our own way of telling stories or do our own way of speaking. And it's in the nuance of how you describe and tell stories that people realize whether they care or not. And you've probably been through this experience as well, that you have either seen speakers or been in conversations where they're talking about something that you just don't care, right? It's not something that you want to pay attention to, or something that is not really that relevant to you, or the way that the speaker is presenting something is really monotone or really boring. I don't know. I don't know how else to say it. But and you're trying to find ways to get out of that conversation, or find ways to leave that so that you can do something that feels more valuable or more useful to you. And that is exactly what happens in our marketing, right? Marketing works the exact same way. Most people are coming into your website, or are coming into your social media, or whatever marketing that you're doing, into your world, let's say, now that we've learned about that, but they don't know anything about you, right? It's your job to tell them a story that keeps them engaged and learning more about your business, to lean in so that they get sucked in, you know, and get to know more about your business or your services or what you do and what's worth doing, etc. A story that makes them want to remember you and buy from you. There's some classic examples that I usually talk about, that I think people tend to do these people tend to do them really well. And one of them is Nike, when it comes to the idea of telling stories in marketing. But for Nike, oftentimes the marketing that you see that comes out of them, they're not selling you shoes. They're selling you a dream. They're selling you, you know, the fact that you can do this. They're selling you this idea, this story, that if you work hard enough and, go through the hardships and what's going to come out at the end in sports, in sports world, but what's going to come out at the end, you keep pushing and you keep going through, you're going to end up being successful. And when you are successful, Nike's going to be right there. So when they become successful, guess what? They get a sponsorship approaching them, a sponsor approaching them. Nike is one of them. And that is what they have built. They have built this story, this marketing that just lives on and captures people and their attention by not talking about their shoes. Another good example that I see often is Red Bull. So, Red Bull, obviously, everybody knows about Red Bull, but a lot of their marketing, not all of it, but a lot of their marketing actually has really nothing to do with selling their sports drink. I don't even know if it's a sports drink, it's more of like an energy drink. But a lot of their marketing is tied around, doing crazy stunts, doing crazy things, extreme sports, if you want to call it that, because that's what appeals to their audience. That's what they have found or they have created that people enjoy. So they put their brand and they support a lot of athletes that are doing wild things or are doing unique things. And they put themselves against that because, like, hey, if you like having, this level of energy that's like, oh my God, I did something and it's amazing and it's so unique and it's so difficult and it's so special. That's what they want you to feel about their brand. That's what they want you to feel about their product, right? They're creating a story as well, just through their own lens. And another popular example that I look at that is, something besides sports, if you will, but it's the company of Patagonia. So they sell outdoor apparel, if you will. But a lot of their marketing is not tied to that. A lot of their marketing is tied to what they care about, right? Or what they seemingly care about. And what they care about is saving the world, is, putting less product into the landfill. So they have a lot of really unique services and really unique things that they have kind of come up with it, including how long their product lasts for the specific purpose of creating a better environment, right? They're environmentalists and they care about that. So they talk about that and their marketing revolves around that. So that if you care about the environment, if you care about these things that they care about too, then you have found a place. And that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make or that I'm trying to get people to understand here uh, when it comes to storytelling is a lot of your marketing doesn't have to be about your product, right? It can be about what you care about. It can be about what your audience cares about. See, these companies, they talk about what they care about. And when the audience cares about the same things, they don't feel sold to. They feel found. They feel like they've found a place to belong to. Just think about how many people there are with Harley Davidson tattoos, as an example. Why is that? Why do people choose to put a logo, to put a brand company on their body forever? It's because it means something to them, right? It tells a story. People identify with what that is. And at this point, you're probably telling me, yes, that is all well and good, but these corporations, these companies, they have millions of dollars in marketing budget, right? So can I even do this? And the answer for me is yes, because at the end of the day, they're just telling stories. They're being, they pay a lot of money to put it in a lot of places and they hire people that know how to craft stories very well. But at the end of the day, that's all they're doing. They're just telling a story that you care about and a story that the audience cares about. And that's all it has to be. When you are building your strategy and when you're trying to come up and build the world for people to exist in for your business, It's about being very clear about what you care about, what you value, and tell it in a way that other people understand. Because if you know what to say, it will inevitably make things easier for you to say more things worth people's attention because they will resonate with it. They will care. And that is essentially what a lot of the marketing world, they call it branding. And this gets confused all the time. And I think it's something that, I'd like to bring a little bit more clarity on. But a lot of people think of branding as logos and brand colors and, website design and things like that. But if you sit down and actually think about the branding exercises that marketers usually put you through, what are these things that you have to fill out or what are these things that you have to come up with? You're usually asked about, your positioning as an example, but you're asked about your values. You're asked about your voice. You're asked about your tone and all these little weird things that really all come down to a way of expressing who you are and what you care about to the world. And that's exactly all branding is not logos, is not brand colors. It's a way of expressing who you are. It's just that it can very easily be done through brand colors and through logos and, in a way that design that reflects that, but is not just about those things. It's about the story underneath. It's about that story of who you are and explaining that to the world. That is your story. That is the thing that you can put in your marketing. That is the thing that shapes how everything around gets built. Because if you know that story, then you know, like, okay, so this would probably work better in a video form, or this would probably be better to put on my website, or these parts here are probably better for people that have already gone through my business, right? To tell them deeper and bring them and get them to come back after they have bought something, as an example. And in order to make things a little bit easier, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I like to build stories. And this will work for pretty much anything, whether it's websites or ads or pitches or posts on social media. But really, a lot of building stories, and any author or any creative person is going to tell you the same thing. A lot of it comes down to practice and keep doing it and keep trying it and you will get better because you'll understand the nuance, you'll understand what people appreciate, you'll understand how to craft in a way that feels like you. But to make things a little bit easier, because that can't be just the whole entire thing, um, I like to use something called the 3-act structure, and that's essentially just a framework for storytelling, right? Because you probably already know the main way of telling a story, which is there's a beginning and there's a middle and there's an end, right? So the 3-act structure works in a very similar fashion, but in this context, it uses the setup, the struggle, and the resolution. So the setup is exactly the same as the beginning. You are setting things up. You're setting people up so that the next thing and the next thing that you're going to talk about makes sense, makes logical sense. And you don't get people and get them all confused when you say something. It's like, oh, what happened? One day we were talking about this, and the next day you were doing something crazy, right? You're slowly bringing people through. And then the middle part, which is the struggle, this is where the conflict happened. This is what's happening, right? And it's crazy. And usually this is where it leads to the climax, leads to, how the problem gets solved, and then the resolution at the end where everybody lives happily ever after. And it's a very simple way of just thinking about it, but practice and do this type of thing and think about how I would tell a story whenever you want to build, talk about your product or talk about something for your business, right? Try to tell a story around it instead. Try to craft a story around it. And you can use this 3x structure very well with the idea of what I've talked about in previous podcast episodes, which is the marketing journey that I created, right? The not knowing to knowing, knowing to liking, liking to trusting, and trusting to becoming a client. And it all falls in a very similar pattern because the first parts of not knowing to knowing, right? And knowing to liking, as an example, can all falls within the setup, right? And then liking to trusting and then trusting, that all becomes the struggle, right? The conflict and the things that they should know and the things that you should understand to make you get to a certain point where now when I tell you this is worth your attention, this is worth you to understand that these features are going to help you and this price is the way that it is, the resolution, if you will, then it makes sense for them to be like, okay, so maybe I want to purchase this, right? That is the main way that I use how to, tell stories in a very simplistic way. It can get a little bit more complicated, but I want to keep this as clean as possible for someone that has never tried doing it to actually kind of start at the very least. But there's another way that you could craft stories that could potentially work better for you. I've done this as well, and I do quite enjoy it. I do quite like it. In fact, this was the first time that I started kind of crafting stories. I actually used this method more because it made more sense in my head. But now that I've done it multiple times, I find it easier to just kind of go from the beginning to the end. But anyways, the other way that you can do is actually to start from the end and go backwards to the beginning. To create a story and start with the end in mind. And this is how, as an example, what you want at the end of this story, just for, simple simplicity's sake, the thing that you want at the end of the story is for them or for someone to purchase something. Okay. So this is the end is I'm going to buy something. What is the thing that comes before that? Well, the thing that comes before is I know all the good things about it, or I'm excited, right? I'm in an excited state that I want to purchase something, or I want to purchase this, or this solves exactly my problem. That's what comes before. What comes before is my understanding of that you have something to sell or that you have something worthwhile or, you know, an understanding of what my problem is. And the next thing and the next thing and the next thing until you get to the beginning of like, who are you? Right? I'm Googling something or I'm searching because I feel like there's something that I need to learn more of, and I don't know what it is. And it's not until I find your website that I then realize what my problem is. And then, you take me through that story, et cetera, et cetera. But starting from the end could actually prove to be somewhat useful for a lot of people that haven't done this before, just simply because it's it's about creating logical steps, right? So what do you want people to feel, know, and understand for the next thing to make sense, right? And you build backwards and one at a time. It can be a lot of beats, right? In storytelling or in creating and writing, it's called beats. You can have a lot of beats, or you can have like two, right? I want them to buy something. Before that, I want them to be excited about buying something. And over before that, I want them to know that this is worth buying, whatever, right? And then you have something, a semblance that you can craft, a story that you can craft from there. And this is a question that I usually tell people that if you're going to be doing this exercise, to always think about once you have, started. But it's what do people need to know, understand, or agree to in advance, so that this point makes sense. So if you started from the end, right, what do people need to know, understand, or agree to in advance so that this ending of buying something, as an example, makes sense? But the overall point, of this episode is that you want people to remember you. You want people to care enough to choose you over your competition. You want to stand out. And in order for you to be able to do that, is you got to know how to make them feel something. Feel something for your business, feel something for the marketing that you put out, right? Because anything else, it's just noise. When you're putting content for the sake of content, it's noise. And there's a lot of that on the internet. You don't stand out just by having more of it, right? It's not worth remembering. Your job and our job as businesses is to create stuff that is worth remembering, that is worth being remembered for. And I have this quote that I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite quotes of all time. And it's by Maya Angelou. And it goes, "People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel." Thank you for listening to this episode of Antiviral. And if you have a little bit of time, I would really love it if you reviewed on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening from, to just leave a review. It really helps this episode, and it really helps the podcast grow. And if you have any issues or you have any questions that you want answered in a future episode, just go to my website and contact me. I am happy to talk, and I'm happy to build episodes around what people actually want to listen to. So thank you very much. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.